This is what we're making today. It's a pop-up nature journal, something a bit different, and it's easier than it looks. I made this using stamps, but you could also draw the trees or use collage. And here's another version that I made off camera, which is painted. So using these techniques, you can create your own version. This is a mini journal, so it's quite small, but you can make it any size. I used an A4 sheet of paper, which I cut in half. Then I folded it in the middle, and then I folded each side to the middle. I used this bone folder to crease the edges, but you don't need to do that. You could use a ruler or just your fingers. This is the easiest version of this journal that I could think of to share with you. I have made ones that are bigger and longer than this. If you want it to be longer, you can join two pieces of paper together. And then you need to refold it so it looks like this, zigzag. The next stage is to cut some slots in the middle where you want your pop-up tree to be, and this is a really simple way of making a pop-up in your journal. I measured the slots first with a pencil, and then I used a craft knife on a cutting mat to cut the slots. I cut the slots to be about 7 centimetres, which is about 2.5 inches, by about 1 centimetre thick, which is about half an inch. You will need to bear in mind how big you want your pop-up to be, and I've made it as simple as possible by putting these slots in the middle of the fold. This is probably the most fiddly bit, but it's not that difficult. Then you'll need to refold it as I'm showing you here, so that these pieces of paper in the middle stick up to support your pop-up tree. So this is what it looks like from the top. As I said, you could make a longer journal than this by joining two pieces of paper together, but I'm showing you the easy version first. I used stamps to create my trees. You can buy these stamps in acrylic sheets like this, and then you attach them to a block and use this to print with. And I used black archival ink. As I said earlier, you don't have to print the trees. You can draw or paint them or use a collage. Creating a journal is like doing a puzzle. Use what you have or feel comfortable with to fill each page. I printed 3 trees altogether. I only needed 2, but I like to give myself options. What I find is I tend to have these little patches when I try and print something, and I use a fine liner pen to fill in the gaps and just go over it. I also decided that I didn't quite like the shape of these trees for the pop-up because they're not quite symmetrical. I added on a few branches onto the side. It would be easy to actually draw your own little tree, but I quite like the idea of using stamps and making it a bit easier for myself. And also adding on a few extra branches onto these prints makes them look slightly different from each other. To make it really simple, over the top of the printed trees I used Prussian blue watercolour paint and just painted a very thin layer over the top. This is the easiest way to create a scene, is to draw your trees in silhouette and put them against a dark sky, and it can look like a nighttime scene. These trees are going to be cut out and put onto your folded piece of paper, and I'm also painting the Prussian blue all over the background. In my other version of this journal, I painted a daytime scene and painted clouds in the background and more trees. But on this simplified version, I just thought that a layer of Prussian blue watercolour paint would do the job. So when you're happy with the background, leave it to dry, and then you can cut out your trees and position them on the background. I found that the trunk of the tree wasn't quite long enough, so I drew an extra bit on the end. You will need to make whatever you draw fit within the background and across the tab that you've made. So this is something to bear in mind when you're thinking about the size of your drawing or print. When you're happy with the final version, you will need to fold it in half because it's going to sit on the tab in the middle. And make sure it fits on your background and you're happy with it before you glue it down. So I've chosen 2 of the trees here, and I'm using double-sided tape to glue them in position. You could use white glue, but I found double-sided tape easier for this project. I've put on the double-sided tape on the tab, then taken off the backing, and then position my tree on there. And this can be a bit fiddly because you need to line it all up with the centre of the fold. But using the double-sided tape does make it a bit easier, because you're not going to glue anything onto the wrong part. And then make sure that it still lifts out and that you're happy with how it's folded. And do the other tree. It's amazing how different the 2 trees looked, considering they're both printed from the same stamp, and that's because I added on some lines after I'd stamped it. This is what it looks like from the top. I wasn't quite finished here. I wanted to do more of a background. So I looked at the other stamps that I had in the pack just to see what I could stamp in the background and position it before I actually stamp it. And then once I was happy, I stamped in some trees in the background. But you could draw in your background or paint in a background. It doesn't have to be stamped. Or you could use a collage of some trees. This is really easy to do and you can make it your own. And then I went back in with some more Prussian blue. And I also painted a moon. Using black outlines and silhouettes makes it look like a night scene, and adding the moon on there finished it off nicely. This is optional, but you can cover up the slots at the back if you don't like that, or if you want to create a cover, just need to glue a piece of paper over the back. I used PVA white glue for this, but as I said, you don't have to do this, you could just leave it as it is. I used more of the Prussian blue to paint the cover of this little journal. And I also covered up the other slots at the back. You have to be careful not to glue the wrong part, that's the only thing. Also, if you do that, you need to paint the front as well so there isn't a white piece of paper showing through. This is how it eventually turned out, and I'm quite pleased with it. Please consider giving me a thumbs up if you agree, or leave a comment, or do both. And here is the other version that I did, where I painted in gouache the trees. I didn't use a print, and I made a daytime scene. You could make the trees show different seasons of the year. And I love the 3 dimension of this little journal.